All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Living the Dream podcast. Today on the show, we have Dan Edds, who is the author of a new book called Leveraging the Genetics of Leadership. So, Dan, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Thanks for asking. And we like to jump right into the podcast. So, if you could start with telling us a little bit about yourself and some of the things you like to do for fun, that would be great.
Okay. Well, for fun, I guess my favorite hobby is taking pictures with a camera. It's the one thing that I can do where I get outdoors and have a reasonable excuse to get outdoors and do crazy things like hiking up a 200-foot wall in the middle of the night so I can take pictures of the Milky Way. No sane person would do that unless there's a really good excuse.
Yeah, because I definitely wouldn't. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. How long has that been a hobby of yours?
Oh, I don't know. Probably 10, 12 years.
Love it. Love it. Love it. And so tell us a little bit about your background, some of the stuff you do for work and all that.
Well, for 25 years, I've been I've been a management consultant, which means I've worked with probably 200 different organizations in their leadership, culture, cost recovery, process improvement. I've done a fair bit of work with lean, if you're familiar with the term, organizational improvement, team development, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Just curious. I took a couple of industrial organizational psychology courses. Is that kind of that?
Yep.
That ballpark.
Yep. Kind of in that space.
Love it. And so tell us a little bit about your motivation and what gets you up, keeps you going every day.
Well, there's a number of things. One, I'm a born problem solver. If I like to say, if I can't find a few problems to solve, I'll probably go out and create some. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the thing that drives me the most is really giving the rank and file worker the opportunity to understand how they impact the mission of the organization. And I'll just give you an example. I was thinking about this the other day. This is probably 10, 15 years ago now. I'd been asked by a fairly large school district to help them identify their work processes for their custodians and janitors, of all people. So we're talking about, an educational institution. We're talking about people on the lowest level of the organizational ladder, if you will, and because there was fairly high turnover, a lot of people showing up or not showing up for work, taking sick days, and there was always constant, drive for more help. And so they wanted to say, okay, are we getting the most efficiency out of our custodians and janitors? And over the course of about 2 days, maybe even 3, I met with 75 custodians and janitors, and it was more fun because no one had ever asked them what they did. No one had ever asked them, how they did their job, why they did their job, how they could do their job more effectively. And the director of facilities was sitting in the back of the room, and he was writing notes like crazy. And about every break, he'd come up to me and say, Dan, I had no idea these people did this, all of this work. And when we got done, or I got done with the project, I'd calculated that janitors and custodians spend about $400,000 a year just opening and closing doors to schools. And they all told me there's a way to reduce that cost, but we can't get anybody to listen to us. And I said, well, why is that? They said, well, all we have to do is put automatic door locks on all the doors so that from a flip of a switch, we can completely shut down the school or open the school. And so when I showed the school board that that number. They said, well, is there any way that we can reduce that? I said, yeah, you get an automatic switch, you give it to the, to the custodians, and in a flip of a switch, they can lock the school down and open the thing up. And they said to me that simple of an idea can actually increase the safety of our students. I said, yeah. And it was a no-brainer. It didn't take the school board about 10 seconds to adopt or to approve the expenditure. And the custodians and janitors were hired a kite. They were just absolutely thrilled. And I went home thinking, I think I just done the most important job of my career. And it was just a blast to see the excitement, the enthusiasm for, those at the bottom of the organizational ladder, really to have a voice in ways that directly impacted the mission of education in a large urban school district. So that's why I get up in the morning.
Gotcha. No, I love that. I love that. Why do you think the people at the bottom of the organizational ladder are so neglected if they have ideas that are so applicable to the hands-on situation?
Yeah, well, there's two reasons. Since I've got a 96-year-old mother that's been in and out of the hospital for the last couple of months, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. But people who clean the bedpans don't get a whole lot of professional respect. Yet, it is frequently those people who are closest to the patient and the customer who can prevent a fall, who can increase patient safety. And falls in a hospital is a leading cause of accidents. And if anybody's paying attention, accidental accidents in hospitals is a leading cause of death in America. Estimated somewhere of around 160 to 161,000 people die in America because of avoidable accidents in hospitals. Well, who are the people that are closest to the patient that can help them avoid a fall or an accident? Typically, it's the med techs. It's the people who are doing the most mundane, just caring for the basic physical health of a patient. But because they don't have the RN, the MD, and all the letters behind their name, they are frequently ignored, which I think is frankly a travesty.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. Well, awesome. Tell us a little bit more about your book.
Well, it actually started out in a very similar kind of conversation, and it wasn't just one conversation. It was actually a culmination of many. But I'll give you sort of the one that crystallized the project and said, I got to do something about this. And I was asked to by a large state agency to help this one team improve their workflow, improve their process, and frankly, improve the morale of the team. It was probably about 8 or 9 years ago. We were just coming out of the depression, of the recession, and this team its budget had been hammered, massive layoffs, but very little reduction in workload, and so they said, "Can you do this lean project, help them identify their business processes and look for ways to improve those processes, and really give them a voice in their own work." So I was thrilled, and after 4 days we had two, I have to admit, beautiful value stream maps displayed on a large wall, which was simply how value is created through their workflows. And we had figured out that every invoice that they paid, since they were a funding agency, they paid a lot of invoices. Every invoice that they processed had to cross the financial manager's desk upwards of 7 times before it was ever fully processed and paid. And after 4 days, I mean, there was a lot of excitement, and we had designed 3 really simple process improvement initiatives, not one of which required an appropriation of money by the governor, didn't require a whole lot of approval. They could have done it themselves. And at the very end, we were just breaking up, and a guy who was one of their senior managers, he's probably 6'2", 6'3", good sized guy, probably weighs 250 pounds, walked up to the manager, okay? Walks up to the manager, grabs him by the lapels of his sport coat, lifts him up so he's on his tiptoes. I'm not joking. Shakes him like this and says, if you don't do something with this, don't ever ask me to help you ever again. And the guy's head is like, bobbing back and forth. And I'm like 5 feet away, and I'm thinking, this is really pretty interesting. So very last conversation, they said, let's take what we've done and present this to the executive leadership of the department. Large department, had the ear of the governor. In fact, the governor had even campaigned on a platform of more efficient government, and it even said lean was going to be his tool. And so out of respect, we said, yeah, okay. And we made a presentation to the executive team. They were thrilled. They can now go to the governor saying, yeah, see, we're doing lean. We're following your mandates, and, they could pat themselves on the back. Unfortunately, when we walked out of the room, they said, oh, by the way, could you please keep so-and-so, who's not here today, just keep her abreast of what you're doing. And you could just watch the energy in the air just deflate out of these people, because it was, in retrospect, I realized it was another one of those indications that the executive leadership teams, we really don't trust you. We don't really believe that you can pull this off on your own. And in the end, not one of those initiatives was ever implemented. 4 days, 18 well-trained, seasoned people who absolutely wanted the best for their stakeholders, their customers, and the organization. Not one initiative was ever implemented, in my judgment, simply because the culture said from the top down, we don't have to look down. The culture said we need to look up. Any good ideas come from up the organizational ladder rather than below the rank and file. And when I saw that, it was just, I thought, I've seen this thing too many times. And so I began to actually ask the question, how do high impact organizations approach the practice of leadership? It was that simple. I didn't really know what I was looking for. It was just, I got to figure out how high impact organizations approach the practice of leadership. And what I found out was they approach it very, very differently. They approach it with a great deal of intentionality, and they're very clear about how they want their leaders to lead. And that's not what we get in the vast majority of organizations.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. And so that's kind of what spurred you to really get the book started. Tell us a little bit about your vision for the book and the impact that you wanted to have.
Yeah. Well, when I first started doing the research, I was just curious. So, I'm a consultant. People ask my opinion, and so it was kind of just a natural part of evolution of my work. But the more I got into it, I realized that the concepts that I was uncovering really had the capability of reinventing the world of work, seeing people fully engaged with their work. The word we use a lot is human flourishing. Seeing people just come alive in organizations, and not necessarily organizations of large, like healthcare. People just sort of get passionate about healthcare because of the nature of the industry, but seeing people get passionate about manufacturing and like custom commercial furniture, but love going to work every day because their leadership respects them, values their opinion, and gives them the full voice in improving the product, improving the organization, and improving value to people. to the customers. But along the way, there's always setbacks, there's always challenges. But right now, I really don't remember the setbacks and the challenges. What I remember is the incredible people that I had a chance to meet and talk with. My vision for the book is really to start a revolution about how we approach leadership. And I'll just give you one example of one guy that I had the opportunity to interview, which totally blew my mind. After talking with him, I thought, this is the most amazing 1-hour conversation I've had in maybe my life. I'd heard this guy speak at a lunch conference. I'm on the advisory board for the Salvation Army, and so this guy came to speak at a lunch conference, and so being a member of the board, I got invited, and happened to be a retired 4-star general by the name of Barry McCaffrey. You still see him on, he's still a paid news analyst for NBC News on issues of national security. When he retired from the Army, he went on to serve in the Clinton administration as our nation's drug czar. And, if there's anything about leadership this guy does not know about, it's not worth knowing. And he absolutely blew me away. I said, so my standard question of everybody that I interview, I said, so if there was 1 or 2 words that you would use to describe, your organization's approach to leadership, what would they be? And General McCaffrey instantly said, we practice servant leadership. And the next words out of my mouth, I really didn't even hear them because I was so focused on the phone and, taking notes. Until I went back and read the transcript, and he was talking to me about, he used a 4-letter word that I was not expecting to hear, and that word was love. And he told me about during the first Gulf War, so we're talking about 1991, I think. He was the commander of the 24th Infantry Mechanized Division, just a little group of employees of 26,000 soldiers. And yet he's talking to me about being loved by his most senior commander, a guy by the name of Norman Schwarzkopf. And he's talking to me openly and candidly about the role of love in the United States Army. And I'm thinking to myself, the Army trains soldiers to kill people. Yet here's this certified war hero. The guy has 3 Purple Hearts from wounds received in combat. When he retired, it was estimated that he may have been the most highly decorated general to have ever worn the uniform. And yet he's talking to me about love. And I still get goosebumps when I think about, the opportunity that I had to speak with him. And there was, lots more just like him, but he's probably, sort of at that apex. But like I said, right now, I don't remember the setbacks. There were lots of them, but what I remember most is the opportunity of meeting some absolutely incredible people, most of whom will never grace the headlines of a national publication on leadership, but they're absolutely recreating the world of work and leadership and making the world a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I love that servant leadership. I guess my follow-up question to you is, so many organizations kind of take the L when they don't practice servant leadership. And why do you think they don't just make the switch if it's the best for the company?
Well, I think there's 2 reasons. One, they don't really understand what servant leadership is all about. I know lots of people who would absolutely stand up on a platform and espouse the philosophy of servant leadership. And to be maybe a little bit blunt, most of the time what they really want is, please come serve my leadership. They don't understand that servant leadership fundamentally is about distributing power and respecting your subordinates and empowering them and developing them. And I don't think it's just an American thing. I think it's kind of a human thing. We love power. And when we get it, we do not want to give it up because it feels so good. Yet the most influential organizations that I found, organizations that are performing at an elite level long term. And I'm thinking hospitals, manufacturing companies, educational organizations, an elementary school principal of all places. They distribute power. They readily give it away, and they do not hold power something to be held onto with a closed fist. They actually open their hands up to distribute power, to give power to the rank and file. And when you see it, it is a beautiful thing to uphold.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So, what are some of the qualities a servant leader needs before they can really step into that role where they're serving their subordinates?
Well, what does the servant leader need before they step into the role? Um, Interesting question. I've had a lot of questions. That's a little nuanced, so thank you.
Yeah.
Um, I, there's always a certain amount of humility and self-reflection that goes on in leadership. I'm actually taking a leadership development course right now, and I mean, it's nothing novel to say if you are a leader, you want to be a leader, you want to grow in your leadership performance and capabilities, you need a certain level of humility, and that frankly goes a long way. But the other thing is, one of the reasons why I think servant leadership is not implemented more is because there's seldom the how-tos. Well, how do I become a servant leader? How do I exercise servant leadership? And since I mentioned the general, I asked him a very, very similar question. I said, so how does the Army support and promote the concept of servant leadership? And he said, well, I'll give you three ways. And the first way, he said, when soldiers are eating lunch or breakfast, dinner in a cafeteria, he said, the highest ranking officer goes through the cafeteria line last, because it is somewhat symbolic, but they are telling their subordinates, you rank higher than I do in terms of, getting basic needs met. And that was one thing that General McCaffrey said about General Schwarzkopf. He was always looking out for the soldier and what does the soldier need. So going last through the chow line, if you will. The second thing he said was, he said, as at this point his language got pretty colorful. He said, when a company is out on a mission, he said, the latrines are, covered up, and the human waste goes into a 55-gallon barrel bucket. And he said every few days, someone has to take a bunch of gas and diesel fuel, pour it into that 55-gallon barrel bucket, barrel, and burn it. He said, you might think that the lowest private is the guy who has to stand there and stir that stuff. He said, the reality is everybody, including the company commander, takes a turn. And the reason is because in a culture of servant leadership, everybody has to take a turn doing the dirty work. And he said the third way that the Army supports the practice of servant leadership is, and actually, as he was telling me this story, I was thinking about a movie, maybe you've seen it, stars Mel Gibson, and it's called We Were Soldiers Then. It's a story about the first major battle that U.S. forces had in Vietnam with North Vietnamese regulars. And General McCaffrey said, when a helicopter is leaving on a mission, The last person to get on that helicopter is the highest ranking officer. The first person to get off that helicopter is the highest ranking officer, because they are putting themselves in harm's way first. And that is consistent with one of the core values of the United States Army, which is selfless service, which they define as putting the welfare of the nation, the Army, and your subordinates above your own. Now, when I've mentioned this several times, people have said, well, my Army sergeant, mentioned them by name going through boot camp, certainly didn't love me. And I said, well, yeah, but 50 years later, you still remember who they are. And but we don't break servant leadership down into action items. And in the United States Army, it reinforces servant leadership one way, and in ways that would be totally inappropriate for, say, an elementary school or a manufacturing company or a hospital. And so because we can't break servant leadership down into certain action items, things that we do, it just gets really hard to actually execute something called servant leadership, even though I don't know anybody who would say servant leadership is a bad idea. It just comes down to, we don't know how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it sounds like it has a lot to do with that 4-letter word, love.
About on his last January, February sometime, I did a podcast with some guys, and their podcast is called Love is a Business Strategy. And when we got talking about it, the reality is that word makes me uncomfortable. In a business organizational setting, it just sort of like makes me uncomfortable. That whatever side of the brain is the rational, logical side, that side of my brain, when people talk about love in an organizational setting, it just like wants to spin out of control. It doesn't compute. And yet every place I looked in an organization that was performing at an elite level, they may not use that word love, but every place I looked, you'd be hard pressed to say, oh, if that's not love, I don't know what is. Some called it love. Others called it things like safety, which would be appropriate in an industrial manufacturing setting with, 2,000 degree molten, metal flowing around. Others called it respect. Others called it engagement. But there was some element of love in every one of the organizations I looked at. Again, even though a lot of them would never have used that word.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that, at the root of all these organizations, it's like people running them. And we have such a need for love,
There is something to be said about that. One of the things that struck me about halfway through doing the research and the writing, which was about a 5-year exercise, I was kind of looking at people I'd talked to, the case studies that I had, and I realized that 3 of the organizations that I was profiling are so good at what they do. 2 of them are in healthcare. One is in manufacturing, but they are so good at what they do. They have so many people asking them for help that they've actually had to spin off a training or consulting arm of their organization just to help other organizations perform at a higher level. And yet at the core of what they do is loving their people. And it's not just loving their people for loving their people's sake. It's loving their people to also include delivering maximum value to their patients or their customers. There's a lot of people that talk about, well, corporations need to treat their people better. They need to treat them with greater respect, greater kindness, all this kind of stuff, which is great, but it's a moral argument that often we think of it as well, we either take care of our people or we take care of our clients, but we can't do both at the same time. The reality is, not only can we do both at the same time, but we should do both at the same time, because on one hand, we raise the level of humanity, and on the other hand, we provide more value to our customers. And what's wrong with that picture? In one case, the small manufacturing company that I referenced a little while ago, they have so many people knocking on their door that are asking them to do business with them. They actually have a 10-point scale, and before they will accept you as a customer, they have to make sure that you score at certain criteria on this 10-point scale, or they say, no, we won't take your business. And they have people lining up. It's a waiting list of people who to do business with them. Now, as any kind of a business guy, that's the promised land. That's nirvana right there.
Absolutely.
And yet, at the core of what they do is they're obsessive with value, creating value wherever they find it. And the biggest place you find value is with your people. And so that organization and every other one I looked at, they're obsessed with creating value in their people, and it pays back dividends in spades.
I love it. Awesome. Well, if there was one or two types of people, or maybe specific people that you have in your head that would help you take the next step towards really just changing leadership across the world, who would that person be, and how would they do it?
Great question. So, and instead of telling you my opinion, let me actually share the story of one of the people I interviewed in the book. Brian is a young guy. When I interviewed him, we were having lunch one day, and he was probably 37 years old. A couple of years prior, he had applied for an internal promotion in his company, which is one of the largest engineering firms in the world, 18 or 19,000 employees, something like $5 billion in revenues. And he said, when I applied for this promotion, he said, I thought I was applying for a title, and then gave it to me, and I realized I didn't have a clue what I was supposed to do as a leader. And so I said, so let me guess, they sent you off to 3 months leadership training to make sure you were successful. And his eyes got big. I mean, he's an engineer, so he takes everything serious. His eyes got real big. He said, no, they didn't do anything. So I said, well, don't take it personal. And of course I asked, what did you do? And what he went about doing is something that anybody can do. In my language, he designed a system. That's what he does for a living. He designs, wastewater treatment systems. But he said, actually, he said, I did some research on in leadership, and I concluded that research is fundamentally a relational enterprise. So anytime someone says, well, how do I improve my leadership? I say, it's a relational enterprise, plain and simple. If you don't like relationships, stay out of it. So with Brian, I said, so how did you go about doing that? He said, well, I started out small at first. He said, when people would come into my office and, have this problem or that problem, he said, I always would take a few minutes just to get to know them as people outside the context of the company. And he said that was working pretty well. So I thought, well, I'd take it to a next step. And when I would go to their workplace, their cubicle, I'd always take a few minutes just to learn about them and their family and where they come from, just so I could start building a relationship with them. And then he took another step. He said, I eventually ripped out all of the cubicles and all the walls in the office, because I thought if relationship with me and my staff was good, it was even better if people on his team had relationships with each other. So he took out all the cubicles, ripped out all the walls, turned the office into an open office concept. But the one thing that he did that I thought was the absolute brilliant, actually there's two things I thought was just brilliant. Number one, he made it a point, and I would tell any aspiring man or woman who aspired to a position of leadership, the first thing you do, recognize that leadership is a relational enterprise. The second thing you do is get your butt out of your chair and you go and work or visit side by side with your team. And that was the number one thing that I found in looking at these high impact organizations, was this cultural requirement or mandate that if you're a manager in this organization, your job is outside your office. Your job is working side by side with the rank and file. Your job is coaching and teaching and mentoring them on a daily basis, not in a classroom, but on a daily basis. You're working side by side with them. And then the second thing that Brian did, which again I thought was just brilliant, was he set up a 360-degree review of his own leadership. Talked to his HR department. They helped him design a 360-degree review so that his subordinates can rate his leadership, which is a frightening thing. So I said, well, how did that go? And he got really serious. And he said, Dan, I was reading the responses to this review of myself. And he said, I had to close the door to my office because I was crying, and I didn't want anybody to see me crying, because I was absolutely blown away by how meaningful it was for my people who called me their boss to have a relationship with me. And you know, I tell people all the time, you do those two things, get your butt out of your chair and go visit and work with your people, and then occasionally ask them for feedback. They will give you honest feedback, and it will be the best feedback you will ever have in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Those are some great tips, and like fairly simple, but also puts leaders in a vulnerable, humble position.
You know, you can go to a lot of different universities. Universities of various types are cranking out PhDs in organizational leadership. And from what I saw, yeah, there's always a need for better education, you know, better understanding. That's great. The best leaders that I found were the ones who practiced very simple practices. Things like writing a thank you note. Write a thank you note. That's not hard to do. It doesn't take a PhD in organizational leadership. There's a great story of a guy named Doug Connon, I think. He was the CEO of Campbell's Soup from 2001, I think it was, to 2011, responsible for one of the great corporate turnarounds in America. What he's best noted for is that during his 10-year tenure of Campbell's Soup, he wrote somewhere in the area of 30,000 thank you notes. Do the math. He's writing 10 to 15 thank you notes every day of the week. And yet during the last recession, the economic performance of Campbell's Soup far outpaced their peers, far outpaced their competitors. And one of the things that he credits that with is write thank you notes to your people. Let them know you appreciate them.
Yeah, that's epic. I love that. Awesome.
Doesn't take an MBA or a PhD to do it.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. Well, now we're going to jump into our thriving three.
Okay.
And I just want to get to know a little bit about you and how you thrive in life. So what's your favorite book, movie, or podcast? Pick one.
Oh, you know, that's hard to define because there's a lot I like. Favorite book, you know, there's a book that you hear quoted a lot, and it's a book that I come back to every 4 or 5 years and reread it. it's called A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I just find myself sort of going through these cycles, and then I come back to that one. Just a terrific book. What was the second one you're asking about? Favorite movie?
Yeah, book, movie, or podcast.
Favorite movie probably would be any of the of Lord of the Rings, the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy. I guess I'm a sucker for good versus bad. The little guy takes on the evil empire of the world. And favorite podcast, I can't say I have one. I don't have one myself. I love doing these podcasts like what we're doing right now, because we have a chance, I think, to get in and really look at some issues that really impact people and where they work, impact them in a way that goes far, far beyond, simply getting a paycheck. And I think that there, especially right now with COVID and all of the dislocations that's going on in corporate America, the changing shift of power inside our organizations right now, I think we have a tremendous opportunity to really rethink the whole world of work, what it means, how we're doing it, why we're doing it. And I hope that we can absolutely start a revolution in the way we do leadership, because we will not only change the world, we'll actually deliver better value to our customers.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. What's one way you like to care for yourself?
What's one way I like to care for myself? Oh, that would be going out and taking pictures, because it's the one thing I could do where I could turn one side of my brain off and turn the other one on, and I have a good excuse to do it. And nobody looks at me like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, I love it. What is the most epic or beautiful picture you've taken recently?
Recently, well, so I love visiting Southwest Utah. There's 5 national parks in Utah, and I've visited all 5 of them and taken pictures of all 5 of them. And there is a place in Canyonlands, and if you see any picture of Southwest Utah or the Southwest in general, is going to have some version of this picture. It's at a place called Mesa Arch, and it's a little arch that if you sort of like slide underneath the arch, it's a 1-step drop, but that step is about 1,000 feet straight down. And so you don't want to slip.
Yeah.
But on almost any given day, there's anywhere from 20 to 75 people, every one of whom was trying to get that epic picture of the sun coming up, that's just cracking the LaSalle Mountains on that's about 75 miles away in Colorado. And I've got a picture of the sun just peeping over the horizon. And one of the reasons why that's such an epic place is because the sunlight comes towards you and hits this vertical rock wall it's red. I mean, it's as red as red. It hits that vertical wall and then bounces straight up and then hits the underside of this arch. And you don't see it too much with the naked eye, but when you see it in a camera, it looks like that arch glows. And so you've got the sun just popping up over the horizon, and then the glow of this arch. And it's pretty cool, if I do say so myself.
That sounds pretty cool. I love it. Awesome. Well, what's one action step that you can take right now to continue to spread your message of leadership and start to revolutionize it?
Well, I love that question. Having conversations like this is one thing that I could do right now. The other thing that I'm working on right now is I've seen the impact is really more about just talking about individual leadership, is really talking about organizational culture. So what I'm really focusing on right now is how do I communicate the organizational benefits of rethinking leadership. And I would say that to anybody who is looking at leadership, is involved with leadership, at some point in our conversation around leadership, we have to start thinking about the impact of the organization and the impact on the people that we lead and that we serve. In this country, the data says that we spend somewhere around $50 billion a year in leadership development, but the value, the return on investment to our organizations, really sacred institutions, hospitals, schools, colleges, universities, nonprofits, government, as well as our most prestigious commercial organizations. The ROI of leadership development is virtually zero. And that's from places like Harvard and Stanford and McKinsey and the Gallup organization. They're all concluding that there's virtually no benefit to the organization, and leadership in general is declining in value across our country, in fact, across the planet. And there is so much that we can do that's so simple that we can really, if given the opportunity, we can really recreate the world of work, give people the opportunity to flourish, to become better human beings, and there's abundant examples of this. All we have to do is look for them. And I would tell any young person that's sort of wanting to walk down this road, find someone that you respect and that you value, and just say, hey, can I follow you around someday? Let me just watch you and see how they interact with their people and their staff. I don't think leadership is something that we learn academically. I think it's something that we see it modeled, and then we catch the modeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Is there anything else you want to chat about before we sign off?
Tell me more about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So, fairly young guy, 22.
Right now?
22 right now.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Cool. I'm in great company.
Yeah. So fairly young guy, and realized at a younger age than I am now. I was gonna say a young age, still young.
Yeah. Right.
That thinking big was crucial for my life journey, and so grew up pretty poor. So I thought really big of like two main goals in my life: financial freedom for myself and my family, and then spending the rest of my life ending poverty around the world. Like that's what I want to go for. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And I have also been on the self-discovery journey of like, what do I really love doing? And this actually changed my life. There's this dude who runs carrot.com, which is a website for real estate investors and agents. And he like creates websites for them. The energy audit that he has on his website is like, he writes down the activities that give him energy, writes down the activities that drain energy from him, and he tries to focus on the things that give him energy. That's actually part of the reason I took this podcast daily.
Cool.
I wrote down the things that give me energy, and one of those things was talking to people about their dreams and goals, because another thing you should know about me is that I played football most of my life and hated it.
Really?
And, Yep. I was pretty good at it too. Went to college for it, but absolutely hated it. And because I hated it, but was doing it with all my time, I never cultivated my passions or my interests. And so I really know how much it stinks to be doing something that you hate and feel trapped in it. So I'm really passionate about hearing what people love and helping them do it. And so that's kind of why I started the daily podcast. Real estate syndication for apartments is kind of my ticket to building generational wealth and financial freedom. And yeah.
Well, I absolutely applaud what you're doing, how you're going about it. I mentioned I'm going through a leadership development course right now. I've been through them before, and if you haven't noticed, I have a little bit of gray hair here, and I think so many times I think if I would have been doing this like 40 years ago, I'd be way smarter than what I am right now. And the biggest thing one of the biggest things that I think we all face is not recognizing that the good Lord has given each and every one of us something unique and special and worthwhile to do. And he has uniquely enabled us, given us the skills to do that, to do those things. And so many times we let everybody and everything else in the world describe for us what we ought to be doing, and never recognizing or realizing that we have gifts that God has given us to be used for his purpose and his glory, and to take care of other people and make the world a better place.
Yeah.
So congratulations. I totally applaud you both for the economic vision, as well as the larger vision of ending homelessness and poverty. I happen to be I'm the chairman of the board of advisory board for the Salvation Army here in the Seattle area locally, and that's what we do day in and day out. And I meet the people who are doing this work, and I walk away every time and I think, where did we get these people? They're just, so many of them will never be recognized on Wall Street. They'll never get their name recognized in any kind of a big publication, yet they are by and large the most fulfilled, satisfied, hardworking, people that I know. Get to fulfill their passion, or otherwise they wouldn't be there. They get to work in that place where they feel that God has uniquely prepared them to work, and it's just it's pure magic to watch it. So
Yeah.
Way to go. Don't give up. In 20 years, you'll find out something else to do, but that's okay.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate the encouragement for sure. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, keep it up.
Awesome.
When I was 22 years old, I wanted to change the world, but in different ways. And some ways that I haven't lost. That vision has just kind of morphed and changed into other ways of looking at it. But I just applaud you for your vision, what you're trying to do. And there's nothing wrong with having good, solid economic motivation, but yet to tie that, and people I know that have tied those two passions together of, economic opportunity and taking on things like poverty and homelessness. People that I know that are doing that, man, there's some dynamic people there, and they look at life in a way that's beautiful. I mean, it's holistic, it's worthwhile. They're not going to become slaves to the dollar, but they're really about becoming slaves to humanity and serving humanity the best way that they can.
Yeah, servant leadership, if you will.
Gosh, there it is again.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. It's been a thrill.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you're listening to this and you loved what Dan had to say, Dan, how can they reach you? And
simplest way is just my website, Edds, EDDS.com, and got a contact form there. Just fill that out. And if they just want to get on a mailing list or get on my constant contact list, just give it to me and it goes right to the constant contact. And then they get special reports that I send out and notifications of seminars and workshops and all that kind of good stuff.
Sounds good. You heard him. If there's any way that you feel like you vibe with his dreams, or you can help him with his dreams and goals and change leadership across the world, make the contact, get on the email list. Also, send this episode to somebody you know who needs to hear the message about leadership, maybe somebody who's an emerging leader and can also get connected to Dan. And finally, just go ahead and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. We'd greatly appreciate it. And we're out.